Communal Deadlock and a Way to Solve It by Babasaheb Ambedkar. 3. Constituent Assembly. The second question that I wish to raise is, should there be a Constituent Assembly charged with the function of making a constitution? Constituent Assembly is on the lips of everybody. The Congress parties in their resolutions passed before the Congress ministries resigned, demanding that the Constitution for India should be made by a Constituent Assembly composed of Indians. The Constituent Assembly was included in the Cripps proposals. The Sapru Committee has followed suit. I must state that I am wholly opposed to the proposals of a Constituent Assembly. It is absolutely superfluous. I regard it as a most dangerous project, which may involve this country in a civil war. In the first place, I do not see why a Constituent Assembly is at all necessary. Indians are not in the same position as the fathers of the American Constitution were when they framed the Constitution of the United States. They had to evolve ideas suitable for the Constitution for a free people. They had no constitutional patterns before them to draw upon. This cannot, however, be the case for Indians. Constitutional ideas and constitutional forms are ready at hand. Again, room for variety is very small. There are not more than 2 or 3 constitutional patterns to choose from. Thirdly, there are hardly any big and purely constitutional questions about which there can be said to be much dispute among Indians. It is agreed that the future Indian constitution should be federal. It is also more or less settled what subjects should go to the center and what to the provinces. There is no quarrel over the division of revenues between the center and the provinces, none on franchise and none on the relation of the judiciary to the legislature and the executive. The only point of dispute which is outstanding centers around the question of the residuary powers, whether they should be with the center or with the provinces. But that is hardly a matter worth bothering about. Indeed, the provision contained in the present Government of India Act could be adopted as the best compromise. Having regard to this, I cannot see why a Constituent Assembly is necessary to incubate a constitution. So much of the Constitution of India has already been written out in the Government of India Act 1935 that it seems to be an act of supererogation to appoint the Constituent Assembly to do the thing over again. All that is necessary is to delete those sections of the Government of India Act 1935 which are inconsistent with Dominion status. The only function which could be left to a Constituent Assembly is to find a solution to the communal problem. I am quite positive that whatever be the terms of reference of the Constituent Assembly, the communal question should not form part of them. Consider the composition of the Constituent Assembly as suggested by the Sapru Committee. The total membership is fixed at 160. The election is by joint electorates by the members of the provincial legislative assemblies under a system of proportional representation, and the decision is to be 3/4 of the members present and voting. Can a minority accept this Constituent Assembly as a safe body in the impartiality of which it can place implicit confidence? The answer to this question must depend upon what answers one can give to 2 other questions. Does it guarantee that the representatives of a minority elected to the Assembly will be its true representative? Secondly, does it guarantee that the decision of the Assembly with regard to the claims of any particular minority will not in fact be an imposition on the minority? On neither of these 2 questions can I confidently say that a minority need have no cause for fear. Before taking up these questions, let me point out what differences there are between the Cripps Constituent Assembly and the Sapru Constituent Assembly. They may be stated as follows. 1. The total number for the Constituent Assembly fixed by the Sapru Committee is 160. Sir Stafford Cripps had not fixed any number, but the provision contained in his proposal that the Constituent Assembly shall consist of 10% of the total number of members of the provincial legislatures, virtually fixed the number to about 158, a difference of only 2. 2. The method of election to the Constituent Assembly by the Subpro Committee is by joint electorate under the system of proportional representation. In this, there is no difference between the Cripps plan and the Subpro plan for the composition of the Constituent Assembly. 3. Under the Cripps plan, there was no communal reservation. The Subpro plan departs from the Cripps plan in this respect, inasmuch as it reserves seats for particular communities in prescribed positions. This difference is only normal, for though the Cripps plan did not in terms fix the number, the scheme of proportional representation would have in fact resulted in such reservation. The difference in the quota of representation under the two schemes will be seen from the following table. Quota of seats under Cripps and under Subpros. Hindus 77-51, Muslims 50-51, Scheduled castes 15-20, Sikhs 3-8, Indian Christians 2-7, Anglo-Indians 1-2, Europeans 6-1, Aboriginal tribes 2-3, special interests none 16, others 2-1, total 158, total 160. The Subpro Committee has not only fixed the numbers for each community in the composition of the Constituent Assembly, but it has offered the Muslims equality with the Hindus. For this departure, the committee's plea is that in consideration for this offer, it is demanded joint electorate as a basis for election to the Constituent Assembly. In this, the committee must be said to have entirely misunderstood the Cripps proposals. Joint electorates were already provided for in the Cripps proposals, one clause of which reads, the members of the lower houses of the provincial legislatures are to form a single electoral college. This is simply another way of saying that the election shall be by joint electorate. It has given something for nothing to one element and thereby put the other communities in a hazard. 4. Under the Cripps proposal, the decision of the Assembly was to be by a majority of those present and voting. Under the Subpro proposal, the decision is to be by a majority of 3/4 of those present and voting. Now to revert to the two questions. How does the position stand with regard to the first question? To give one's opinion on it, it is first necessary to know the communal distribution of the membership of the provincial legislative assemblies. The following table sums up the position. Distribution of seats by communities in the provincial legislative assemblies. Communities: general, women, university, trade, unions, commerce, landlords, total. Hindus: 651, 26, 7, 33, 31, 22, 770. Muslims: 482, 10, 1, 5, 6, 13, 517. Scheduled castes: 151, none, 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 151. Indian Christians: 20, 1, none, 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 21. Anglo-Indians: 11, 1, none, 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 12. Sikhs: 34, 1, none, 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 1, 30. Europeans: 26, none, 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 19, 1, 46. Aboriginals: 24, none, 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 24. Total: 1,399, 39, 8, 38, 56, 37, 1,577. Has the communal reservation made by the subgroup proposal and which is not to be found in the Cripps proposal any value? That depends upon how far one community will be able to influence the election of the members of the other communities. What are the prospects in this regard? Let me give another table. Communities. Voters for Constituent Assembly. Quota of seats in the Constituent Assembly. Number of votes required for electing the quota. Plus is excess of voter over minus is deficiency of voters below requirement. Hindus 778, 51, 561 plus 217. Muslims 561, 51, 517 plus 44. Scheduled castes 151, 20, 220 minus 69. Indian 21, 7, 77 minus 56. For Indian Christians, Sikhs 36, 8, 88 minus 52. Europeans 46, 1, 11 plus 35. From this table, the following conclusions emerge. 1. Taking the total values to be 1577 and the total number to be elected 160, the quota under the proportional system of representations would roughly come to 10 plus 1, 11. 2. Taking 11 as the quota, the Hindus will have 217, the Muslims 44, the Europeans 34 votes to spare, while the scheduled castes will be short by 69, the Indian Christians by 56, and the Sikhs by 52. To put the same thing in a different way, 1. The Hindus with their excess of 217 votes can elect 20 non-Hindus who would be dependent upon them. The Muslims with their excess of 44 can elect 4 non-Muslims who would be dependent upon them, and the Europeans with their excess of 35 votes would be able to elect 3 non-Europeans who would be dependent upon them. 2. The scheduled castes with a shortage of 69 votes will be able to elect only 13 members on the stock of their own votes, and for 7 seats they will have to depend upon Hindu, Muslim or European voters. The Indian Christians with a shortage of 56 votes will be able to elect only 2 seats of their own stock of their own voters. For the rest of the 5 seats they will have to depend upon Hindu, Muslim or European voters. Similarly, the Sikhs with a shortage of 52 will be able to elect only 3 seats on the stock of their own voters. For the rest of the 5 seats, they will have to depend upon Hindu, Muslim or European voters. Such is the position. It is evident that the excess representation granted to the smaller minorities is only an eyewash. Their representation is made so dependent that in no sense can it be called a real representation. Let me now take the second question. Is the rule of decision adopted by the subgroup committee for the Constituent Assembly a safe rule? The Cripps proposal had adopted the rule of bare majority. This was an absurd proposition which no sensible man could have proposed. I know of no case where questions relating to the Constitution were left to be decided by a simple majority. The Cripps proposal sought to excuse the adoption of the majority rule on the ground that there was to be a further provision for safeguarding the interest of the minorities. The provision was to take the form of a treaty between the British Crown and the Indian Constituent Assembly before Parliament was to relinquish its sovereignty and make India free. The proposal of a treaty would have had some sense if the treaty was to override the Constitution. But the proposal was impossible, as under the Cripps scheme India was free to become a dominion or an independent country as she pleased. For once India became a dominion, it would ipso facto require all the legal power necessary to pass an enactment declaring that the treaty shall not override the Constitution. In that case, the treaty would have been no better than a calendar which members of the minorities might, if they wished, hanged on the walls of their houses. This was exactly what happened to the Irish Treaty. The Irish Treaty continued to override the Irish Constitution so long as Ireland was not a dominion. But the moment Ireland became a dominion, the overriding power of the treaty was taken away by a sure and simple enactment of the Parliament of the Irish Free State, and the British Parliament did nothing, for it knew that Ireland was a dominion, and therefore it could do nothing. How so absurd a proposition came to be forth by so eminent a person to assure the minorities, I am unable to understand. The provisions contained in the subtle proposals appear to be an improvement. But are they really an improvement? I am sure they are not. A three-fourths majority of 160 means that a view to prevail must have the support of 120 members. Before accepting this as an improvement, one has to have some idea as to how this group of 120 is likely to be formed. If the Hindus and Muslims combine, they will together make up 102 and will only need 18 more to make up 120. Most of the special seats and a few from others may easily fall into the hands of this combined. If this happens, the decision of the Assembly will obviously be an imposition upon the scheduled castes, the Sikhs, the Indian Christians, etc. Similarly, if the Muslims are isolated, the decision will not be a joint decision but an imposition upon the Muslims by non-Muslims. These possibilities of permutation and combination for the purpose of checkmating or outmaneuvering of some committees by others, I am sorry to say, have not been taken into consideration by the subcommittee. There would have been some safety if the subcommittee had provided that the three-fourths majority shall at least include 50% of each element. Following upon the procedures adopted in the making of the Constitution of the United States, the subcommittee could have added a further provision for the ratification at any rate of the communal part of the decision of the Assembly by the representatives of the minorities outside the Assembly. None of these provisions finds a place in the plan of the Constituent Assembly as designed by the subcommittee. Consequently, the Constituent Assembly has become a snare. There are many other arguments against the plan of a Constituent Assembly. I may mention one which I confess has influenced me greatly. When I read the history of the union between Scotland and England, I was shocked at the corruption and bribery that was practiced to win the consent of the Scottish Parliament. The whole of the Scottish Parliament was bought. The chances of corruption and bribery being used in the Indian Constituent Assembly to buy over members to support decisions desired by interested groups are very real. Their effects, I am sure, cannot be overlooked. If this happens, it will not only make mockery of the Constituent Assembly, but I feel quite certain that any attempt made to enforce its decisions will release a civil war. It is my considered opinion that the proposal of the Constituent Assembly is more dangerous than profitable and should not be entertained. The end.